Hello and welcome again to Ask Mike Radio. My name is Travis, Marine Corps veteran and your host. Ask Mike Radio is co-produced with Sinister One Productions. What's your podcast doing? I want to thank my sponsor, Joyce Asack of Asack Real Estate, and my supporters, Kason Shaving Company, Exceptional Parent Magazine, and Fight Camp. Be your strongest combination. I think my next guest embody my theme for Oscar Mike Radio this year, which is really for us veterans, we have to embrace civilian perspective and help with our transition. And these two gentlemen have done just that with their book, Warrior to Civilian. I want to welcome Navy SEAL veteran Robert Sarver and his sidekick, brother in arms as it is, Alex Gendzier, lawyer, general counsel. Welcome to Oscar Mike Radio.
Thank you for having us.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I love these guest shows. I get to do so much, and there's so much to unpack here. But we're going to start with, I'm going to change it up a little bit. I want to start with Alex first. Like, out of all the things you could do in life, what drew you to the practice of law?
Wow. So when I was a kid, I had the illusion I would rebel against my parents who were professors by going to Wall Street. And I found a love of camaraderie, a love of working together on important, valuable things. And I had less of a love for some of the kind of 1980s Wall Street excesses and what I would say is corruption of the soul. And I thought that I could combine that background with a desire to create, to add value to companies and people that would be in service of things that were valuable. And I thought that I could have a different kind of background. That's a heck of a long answer, but I would tell you it has been replayed in these last 5 years for me in my partnership with Rob on this book and our larger sense of mission in a way I hardly could have fathomed.
Yeah, because it's not really, when I think of a veteran civilian collaboration, I don't necessarily think of lawyers or legal professionals making that connection right off the top of my head. Or generally, honestly, Alex, when it happens, it's generally probate court, and that's just a bad scene right there. So generally, you're not probate law. Very interesting, very interesting. So, and we'll get more into you all's relationship here in a second. Robert, tell us a little bit about yourself and your military careers, please.
Sure thing. So graduated Naval Academy 20 years ago, did 9 years active duty service, majority of the time SEAL teams, SEAL Team 3. Had a really cool chance to go augment one of our Tier 1 units for a little bit. So after 9 years and 7 deployments, 5 of those over in the sandbox, and then Iraq and Afghanistan, I decided to drop papers and pursue a different career, different life, which brought me over to a veterans program at Goldman Sachs. I went into the investment banking world. This is around 2013. So kind of, just cleaning everything up from the 08, 09 crisis where I was sitting in real estate. And then from there, I went back and did a master's because, as we'll talk about, very new terrain getting out, and I was completely lost, didn't know how to speak about business or kind of acclimate myself. Hit a lot of hard roads along that same time in parallel with my transition. And then did a few other executive roles kind of here and now. And then it was probably about 5 years ago, I went back into private equity on the debt credit side. And that's where I met Alex when he was serving as the general counsel. So that's kind of the 60-second version.
Well, no. Hey, have you ever heard of an org called Veterans on Wall Street?
Yes.
No, it will.
Yes.
Well, we'll get into this later, but we're actually very closely related, all three of us, and we'll get into that later off camera for different reasons. But this is very, very interesting because you get out of the military, and let's be honest here, Rob, there's not a lot of outlets for there are for SEAL team operators in the security world, but not in the financial services world. And you see this missile on my chest. Well, that's the missile I crewed in the Marine Corps. Not a lot of transition to the civilian world. So you've actually walked your talk to make that transition. Take me back though to the beginning. What was it like when you left the SEAL team and went back into the corporate world and realized, okay, I've got to retool and relearn from ground zero?
it was a shock. I mean, I thought people warned me getting out, and I had some very good family friends that, CEO of companies. It's like, Rob, like, do you understand what you're walking into? You're running at 100 miles an hour, doing this spec ops world, SOCOM world. Like, are you ready for this? And I was like, yeah, sure, I can do this. Just put the rucksack on, keep moving. I can just keep moving forward. Why not? And you get there, and it is a massive culture shock, right? It's people. It's acceptable for people to show up a few minutes late, or it's just kind of the run of the mill. Yeah, I see a lot of heads nodding like that. That
Well,
drove
well,
me
well,
nuts.
wait. Hold on, Rob. Because I've talked to some officers in my line of work, and they still act like they're in the battalion, like they're never late.
Yeah.
They're just unavoidably detained.
It's-
Right? I mean, come on, Rob.
Yeah,
Come
yeah.
on. Okay, so,
I,
but
I
yeah,
guess, yeah. I mean, no, we all have our. There's always those moments that hold people up or hold meetings up. But I guess when the phrases came to me, we're talking like 15, 20 minutes late, and my boss is
oh,
like, "Oh, Rob, this is normal." This is like, no, this is not. This is not normal. This is not a standard. Like this is Goldman. You
that's
guys are supposed
billable
to be
time.
it's billable time. You guys are supposed to be the number one investment bank in the world. Like, and this is what you're telling me. This isn't right. Um, the loss of culture, loss of identity, I was kind of living through that, and I was still grasping back to what I knew rather than accepting and turning the page to this new train, understanding that, hey, I'm back at day one, week one.
Yeah.
Like and Alex, and we have a very good friend who uses the great analogy of we were all black belts in our own respective lanes within the military. We were great subject matter experts at our performance in our job. But you have to take that black belt off and you're putting a white belt on. You have to understand you're starting over and you have to rebuild these. Now, we will climb um, that curve much faster with our determination, grit, versatility, and all that, all those characteristics that made us excel in the military. But we have to accept this new terrain. And um, I did not take a step back and fully appreciate that step. So
Well, it's sometimes hard to because, when I got into my civilian, career, it's like, okay, yeah, showing up 5 minutes for late for meetings, no big deal. And I'm like, that's a bad day right there, or not delivering the absolute best you can. Nah, well, it's good, but really, is it really? I mean, Alex, I'll ask you this. You've been in the financial sector and the legal sector for quite some time. What was it like watching someone like Rob come out of the military? Because if you're both familiar with Veterans on Wall Street, so it's not the first time you run into this. What's it like watching that individual try to acclimate to this new corporate landscape?
Yeah. It's one of the things that brought us together and caused us to have conversations about life. So Rob and I didn't know each other when he was getting out.
Sure.
We have spent the last 5 years of our lives on this project, and we are partners in every regard about how we're doing this. To answer your question and to explain a little bit your reference to me as a lawyer, nothing about me being a lawyer is although it's a very fair question, Travis, it has anything to do with the book. What I bring to this book is the civilian side of this military-civilian partnership, which we think makes our book has required us to work extra hard to explain things to each other about things that folks in one side or the other of life take for granted. But because we had to explain things from the ground up about meaning, how things work, how to construct the book and its chapters, we really got to the basics and allowed us to see fundamental patterns in the lives of veterans and their spouses and family members. And by the way, this book is dedicated as much to the spouse as to the veteran. Getting back to a straight answer to your question, the thing that I noticed most about how Rob described his transition to civilian life was although we've come from different worlds, how utterly parallel our lives and have been, how we have faced challenges, life transitions, sometimes successfully, sometimes very much not. And what is it you learn from that if you've been researching and studying veterans? And by the way, we in these last 5 years, we've interviewed a few hundred people, mainly veterans. of all ranks, of all branches. This is not a book for officers. This is a book for everyone. And I love your jibing, Rob, on the officer stuff. It's from every branch. And we've read every book and every blog, and we've done years of research. And what we found in looking at ourselves is that the patterns that we experienced in our own lives about life transition were in many cases apparent or replicated in other people's lives. And we thought that was a premise that we had to explore. Did I answer your question, Travis?
Well, as a lawyer, you did, absolutely. But let me see, if I understood, Air Wing Marine here, so just hang with me. So what you're saying is the book you went through and did all these interviews and distilled your premise down to certain similarities across all branches, ranks, and experiences from, veteran service. And you started there.
That is very fair, but let me try and say it in a way that's even more essential and simple. What Rob and I discovered in each of our separate but parallel life transitions was at root a common humanity, and a common humanity in facing challenges and how your life changes. It's as simple as that. And we saw that everywhere we went.
Well, I do want to kind of dig into that a little bit because I've interviewed World War II veterans, Vietnam era veterans, and a couple Korean War veterans. And not all of them, but a lot of them had this similar story where they got off the plane, train, automobile, bus. Their room hadn't changed since they, left to go into World War II. They put on their clothes, went down, had, Saturday night dinner with their family, went to church Sunday morning, and Monday started work because their dad or their mom or both of them had a job for them. So in other words, they literally took off the uniform, put on their civilian clothes, went back to their life as if nothing changed.
Right.
So fast forward, there's other Marines that I served with, went into law enforcement, went into other jobs that were more minimal to that kind of career path, whose transitions were very easy. And the reason I kind of start off my question is when you go from what, Rob and I did to the sectors you're in, it's a different animal. So I was just trying to see if Rob's experience was different in that way.
Rob, this is really for you, but let me preface this by saying one of our great inspirations was a former teammate of Rob's and close friend of both of ours who was in the SEAL teams. And by the way, this book is not about SEALs. And one of his really insightful points was we do a disservice to veterans when we tell them that this is an okay transition, or we don't tell them it's going to be very hard. And the analogy we've come up with is for some, it's like falling off a cliff. And his point is that if you think civilian life is easier, including for combat veterans, you're wrong. It's just a different challenge on a different terrain. And that analogy we found powerful. But Rob, forgive me, this is really a question for you.
It's Travis, so several things went through my mind. And one thing I think when he's drawing these parallels was looking at Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. Right? We all had this call to adventure. We all left to join the military. We left the known world for the unknown universe. And we went through all this mentorship and training. And some point in line, there was probably some tragedy, right? Death and rebirth
Right, yeah.
of the soul, or we come back, atonement. Some people come back and they can finish that journey on themselves. They can assimilate back into the world. Some people are just forced financially to go find a job and they figure it out. But a lot of people that we have interviewed and we have seen after 20 years of sustainment of combat, and we spoke with some folks in Vietnam, World War II, is they've never made that transition. They've never been able to close out the hero's journey to refine purpose. So you're absolutely right. A lot of people can assimilate back to something easier, but about 70% of the people we spoke with, there's a life stressor in there, this massive transition, the loss of identity, community, the family stress, that they can't make that. And what Alex and you and I, Travis, call it the fog of war. It is almost this mental fog coming back, and you pick a comorbidity to go with it now, right? TBI, PTSD, physical moral injury, that if they don't seek the help and they don't fix the self, reassimilating back into that individual life or the family life, you're not going to be able to communicate, excuse me, you're not going to be able to come back and contribute to the community, which is really the nexus of what everything we're trying to put together, right? As citizens.
Well,
Yeah.
no. This is good.
Yeah.
I'm liking this because one thing I just want to throw out there that I run into is, for me personally, gentlemen, I raised a hand. I said, "Hey, I'm going to defend the America from the Constitution, all that stuff." I did that in MEPS, right? But I don't remember getting out, Rob, where I ever rescinded that oath.
Right.
And it's a small thing, and
Mhm.
I dwell on that. I never said, "Okay, I'm done doing this."
Yep.
You know, I can put this completely behind me mentally and physically. I can't. I
Right.
can't. So there is that missing gap. And I've told somebody yesterday, I said, one of the hard things for me was I didn't articulate that I missed the Marine Corps as much as I thought I was going to. I thought I was going to be happy being out. It sucked. It was terrible. So I think that's a very relevant point to cover
Yeah.
in your book.
Yeah.
So you're going through your transition journey. You're coming back into the corporate world. When did it hit you that, you know what, I need to start writing about this journey from a different perspective, and I need somebody to help me? When did that start happening, Rob?
Well, certainly wasn't writing anything out the gate. And I,
Okay.
probably 4 years after my transition, kind of going through a divorce and kind of a lot of these things were kind of coming up to the surface that I had just kind of pushed down,
Yeah.
compartmentalized, said, I can just keep moving and moving. I'm going to be fine. So I think that was a big wake up point. Finally saying, okay, I'm going to go speak to someone. And I remember going through my divorce, I went through a couples counseling. In 10 minutes, the counselor put his pen down. He's like, Rob, but you got PTSD. I was like, no, I don't. I absolutely do not. And he's like, no. And he kind of walked me through this. He's like, you need to go seek someone like a more of a specialist. That was a big red flag right there. So I went back, got the help, went through another program at Baylor Scott and White. And then I found a Vietnam era psychologist who's been working with vets for 40 years. And he connected all the dots for me. And it was right when I was finishing that up that I started working with Alex. And Alex started asking me a lot of questions about, tragedy, combat, loss of friends in combat, assimilating back into, the world. And I was like, well, Alex, you normally I would not answer these questions, but I just got through this, so I'm going to try something new. I'm going to walk back into this arena of vulnerability and tell you the things that I've been through. And Alex is the one that took a step back, and Alex is glossing over some of his education. He has a lot of Greek mythology and Greek history in his background. So he was able to pull forward, Homer's Odysseus, the circles of concern with Heracles, and put together these ancient frameworks to show that those parallel lives that we've lived. Because Alex, if you don't mind me saying, but Alex went through a massive life tragedy with the loss of his wife and having to raise two boys. So having these major life transitions, and yes, it's not combat, but it's still loss and it still affects us.
Because that was going to be my next question. Like, Alex, where did this empathy slash desire to connect with the veteran community come from? Because some people in don't care or are apathetic. Some people are really, want to understand our experience. And so I'm curious, where did that come from?
Yeah, fair question. It came from two things. Uh, I've got two boys that I could talk forever about. And when the older one wanted to join the military, it was a cause for reflection by me that I had several points in my life when I had wanted to serve and it didn't happen. And I thought, although this was presumptuous of me at the time, he is he is he has a cause. He has a calling that is one of the most profound I've experienced. Whether you're a warrior or a monk or a priest, there's a calling inside of you that drives you, and it has driven him. And I admire both my sons equally on different terms. I thought he would need, when he gets out, a manual, and it's a pretty good chance I won't be around. And so Rob and I started talking, hey, can we write a 20-page memo? And then what we discovered was Rob had his own corresponding deeply personal connection to service of veterans. Every year he mentors 10 to 15 of them. For anyone that knows what's involved in that, that is an enormous commitment of all your free time.
Yeah.
But these personal inspirations for each of us paled in comparison, in my belief, to what we saw when we started engaging in the project. And the mission and the cause became so much bigger. And our sense of calling about service, about what we could do, became so much bigger. And I think it has really been, I would say, cathartic for both of us. But beyond catharsis, it has developed into an enormous passion and life commitment. And I think that that's the best I can do for a short answer.
No, that's a great answer. I just think we're going to scratch it. I need to have you guys back on to really dig into this. I'm just sorry. We're not going to get all this done in 45 minutes. We're just not.
Well,
Anyway,
I mean, Travis would be delighted to, for some folks that it makes sense because our book covers so many different aspects of the life experience of this transition, which, as you know and your listeners know, is something for some folks they get over and it's successful and it's good quickly. And for some whose stories we can tell you, it lasts a lifetime. And by the way, that doesn't mean it's a negative thing. That means that it's such a powerful life experience that the way they digest it, the way they metabolize it, forms over decades a part of their identity that is incredibly powerful and inspiring. And we found those folks. So, Travis, if you're game, there's a lot to unpack here.
absolutely. Absolutely. I'm in for the pound, as you can tell. So, when you started this project, it was supposed to be 20 pages, and it's not. It's a book. I'll have the link to the book in the Awesome Mike Radio show post from Amazon. I prefer Kindle myself, but when you look at the book and what you're trying to accomplish with the book, it went beyond 20 pages real quick. What was your criteria then for talking to veterans to gain the kind of wisdom and insight you wanted to provide to the reader?
So in the book, and this 20-page memo really was more or less my Alex, actually, yes, love to do this with you. Happy to help you, your son. You taught me a lot about the debt credit markets that I would have never have had a mentor like this, a one-on-one, at a private equity shop. And it was very early on. We had several connections back to General McChrystal. And we sat down with Stan, and obviously he was very open, walking us through his story. Walking into the Oval Office, 30 seconds later, he's a civilian, and having to go back and figure out all these things when he thought he had another 2 to 3 years, maybe even 4 in his trajectory.
Yeah.
And he gave us some parting words that stuck with us through I guess at the time, another 4 years of writing was, if you don't make this very practical, it's not going to be worth a damn. So that we set out for the next 4 years, like, how do we synthesize all the medical information, the transition information, the world of emotions, finding purpose, chapter for spouses? How do we consolidate this down into like the most practical handbook out there? And that was our mission statement when we started writing this. And after we'd write a little bit, we get a chapter done and we go test our thesis. We'd have the veterans we were interviewing read what we had. They said, okay, you guys are nailing it. To Alex's point, we spoke about friends that were reading this. I gave this to Lieutenant Dan Knosson, who's a good friend of mine. He lost both legs on his first op in Afghanistan in 2009. And he loved it. But he's like, guys, you don't do anything for spouses. So that sent us on another 9-month mission to go speak to every spouse we could, to put together the most comprehensive chapter we could to help them, because they lose identity. They lose the community as well.
Yeah, you answered my question before I asked it, but where did the spouse component come in? Because here's the thing, gentlemen, is I've talked to spouses who are like, I don't know if I can do another day being married to this man. I mean, I'm dealing with the PTSD all alone, or he needs, physical care, and the VA is getting slow getting my house redone so I can care for him. I have kids, work. I'm just done. And I think it's something that is overlooked oftentimes. So for the spouse out there, what are the challenges besides the obvious that they face, and how does your book address that?
Alex, you want me to start?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, it's so a lot of them, a lot of them kind of give up their careers because they're moving around the military. Things have got better. There's some resources that we list on our website to where um, trying to help these spouses, trying to find reciprocity between states with licenses for teaching and whatnot. So there's resources out there for that. But the getting out piece, it's going to find health insurance, going to find medical insurance, loss of identity. The community is a big one, loss of the community. Um, the PTSD factor. Folks aren't really talking about this. There was a segment probably about 6 months, maybe almost a year ago on 60 Minutes. There's 3 million children now that have secondary, third order effects of PTSD from the serving veteran. And that's kind of gone unnoticed. So everything that they're bringing up is absolutely critical that what we're seeing in the book from the actual veteran, the PTSD, the TBI, getting the medical help. And Alex and I, we kind of turned this tables a little bit to the veterans. Like everything we did in the military was the adage of team, teammate, self. For a moment, you have to flip that on the paradigm. You have to fix yourself. And we go back to those ancient speaking or ancient teachings of Heracles is if you look at the circles of concern of the self, you have to be able to fix the self if you're going to be able to function within the family. And then obviously that whole family unit is the nexus, what makes up our communities, obviously communities into, citizenship, but starting down at brass tacks, we all had the strength, we all had the courage to leave that known world and to go into that, the arena, right? We went through some sort of, to the Marine Corps, we went through that crucible. Why would we not take a step back and go through that arena again and fix ourselves?
Well, we need to. We need to. So, I
Mhm.
mean, Alex, please.
Let
Yeah.
me add, Rob covered the most essential pieces. And I say this with Rob and I have an unending love for our country and a devotion to our government, no matter who is in power. But our government does not recognize, we as a people do not recognize what every military spouse knows and most veterans know, and that is that the military spouse is the backbone of our military and the life and ability of the veteran to go do what he or she does. And I'm not trying to be dramatic, but what we've discovered, what was rubbed in our faces was the high degree to which spouses are forgotten about. And what we discovered, again, in looking at patterns and taking a social scientist approach to our research, was that virtually every aspect of the transition of the veteran was entirely applicable to the spouse. And by the way, there's not one book that has a chapter on spouses and family members. By the way, there's good folks out there that have written some articles, there's blogs. Jen Satterley has done amazing work in this specific area, among many others. But spouses are forgotten about. And the transition is entirely parallel. So what does that mean? A couple real quick points that Rob touched on, I'll phrase in a different way. This is a team sport. If the veteran or the spouse goes about the transition to civilian life on their own, it's very unhelpful. You gotta anticipate and plan as a team. You have to anticipate a year or two in advance. Every point Rob mentioned, the change in community, the loss of identity, sense of purpose. How will you speak to your children if you have children? What are you going to do about finding new community? What are you going to do with your life? How are you going to approach very practical issues about medical benefits, which is a nightmare of a headache sometimes? Not all the time, but when it really matters, you need help, it can be very difficult. So our book follows the same pattern about our chapter, on spouses, follows the same pattern as the rest of the book. It's meant to be very practical. And I also don't mind adding that we were so inspired and so taken with the degree to which veterans and spouses bear their chests, their deepest, most painful, most inspiring, beautiful stories with us, that we felt, Rob and I felt, we had to approach this chapter as very imperfect men that had to have learned a lot about what it means to be a man, a father, a husband through difficult moments and times when we were not our best. And we don't mind saying it out loud because we have devoted ourselves to being bigger about those things. And that's the spirit with which we approach this chapter.
do you feel that you'll ever take that subject matter, that aspect of transition, and focus a book solely on spouses and their transition journey, or is that not being discussed right now?
Our publisher wants us to do 5 different new editions of different cuts on the book. And that's really very flattering. But right now, we've just spent 5 years working on one book, and we're getting invited to speak. We're trying to make a difference in the lives of veterans and their families. Companies are inviting us to speak because we have so devoted ourselves to that aspect of this equation. So it's a wonderful question, Travis, but please take a ticket.
Okay, no problem. I'll be around for a while. Writing a book really involves self-reflection, or you're trying to put this out there. Is anybody going to read it? How will it play? How will it be received? So you mentioned that you had people read this book. What were some of the reactions, not so much of veterans, but people close to you, when you had a beta or a copy you could hand them to look at?
Alex, I'll start, and then I guess from the military side, folks were kind of blown away. Uh, some jokes in there, like, Rob, you actually wrote a book. Like, what'd your old English teachers think of this one? I was like, let's not go down that path. But no, I say that obviously in jest, but we had tremendous feedback from the veterans. A lot of folks say, okay, I loved how you tie this to Francis Tavern, the original veterans with Revolutionary War, or I love the Odysseus, Homer tie, Heracles. We had folks calling us and putting the book down, saying, you guys brought me to tears. I went through the PTSD TBI section. I realized that, hey, maybe I need to go get checked. Like, I'm within your Venn diagram as you lay out that maybe these symptoms I've kind of drifted over to the PTSD. We had people very emotional saying that I wish I had a resource like this getting out. Like, this is incredible. I can't think we have not had, the only negative comments we had were very early on writing the book, that you left this out or you need to address this. So and even the folks that we addressed psychedelics. We went and tracked down Navy Captain retired Bob Kaufman, who worked out of Walter Reed and started the Brain Institute, or NICO. And he helped us and he is a firm believer in the psychedelics, and he helped us with that section. But even folks going down that path to find that spiritual healing or healing through the medicine, that they have been overwhelmed with what we've written. So, Alex, I say that's from the military side. How about, because Alex showed this to his priest, healers, folks that do meditation. What was their feedback?
I think you nailed it. From my end, oftentimes the question is, what the hell do you think you're doing writing a book about veterans? And when I explained the sense of life transition and how you and I discussed it, and bringing in the different parts of my life and what I've seen. I lead teams, I create training programs, I develop people, including those that have had a hard time in life. And when I do that, I think about that and I combine it with the different parts of my life, my fascination with ancient Greek literature and mythology and Joseph Campbell, with having seen and experienced, I don't mind saying out loud, very successful and very terribly ineffective therapy and healing, how to bring the best resources to bear, seeing these kinds of things in the works of others that are just incredibly inspiring. Like, Rob, your former colleague, Dr. Eric Potterat, wrote a book called Learned Excellence, where he brings in a way that's parallel all of the insights from every part of his life experience, not just as a psychotherapist, as a psychologist, to identify the essential elements of successful performance. We and I have attempted to do the similar thing of taking each of the pieces of our lives in this enormous mission. And I think once I was able to complete that over more than a beer with friends, they like, oh, I get it now. And Rob's point about the feedback we've been given was powerful and heartwarming, and it encouraged us to keep on going when at times we're like, well, what are we going to do now?
Bringing up this topic, realized we did not really address one of your earlier comments when we talked about criteria and writing the book. When Alex and I were talking about this, obviously the aperture had to be very wide. Like, this is not for soft. Yes, this is for the whole military, every branch, every MOS. But we wanted to write something that a first responder could pick up. We wanted to write something that the average person who's been through a life tragedy could pick up. And we did. We tested that against folks who've been through divorce, um, unfortunately homicide, and a few other things. And they said, okay, yes, it is written almost categorically for veterans. Got it. But this one chapter on refining purpose or dealing with the world of emotions or guilt or fear absolutely applied to me.
I was going to ask about first responders because, first responders are widely becoming the next
They
wave
are.
of PTSD victims, if you will. They see a lot more trauma than the average person in the military. But I was curious, can the book be applied to? And you already answered the question, so I won't go into it. But I find that very powerful because a lot of veterans get out of the military and bring their PTSD into their law enforcement or first responder job, and it just causes more problems.
You're absolutely right. It does. And I would say with the book kind of launching this past week and everything we've geared up to, military veterans was kind of the main focus now, and then kind of again expanding that aperture. First responders will kind of be the next step that we go work with them.
So kind of winding this down, talking about next steps. Before we get into that, one thing I've talked to a lot of authors, I'm trying to write a book myself, and one thing I find is, how do I say this? There's a cost to writing a book. I've done a lot of audio work, but me doing an audio work is different than me sitting down and writing, 4 to 8,000 words in a second about something that affected me. I feel there's a cost that I incur to do that. That I don't think a lot of people appreciate. Was there a intangible cost to doing this, or did the benefit outweigh the cost and it's not even relevant?
I mean, very early on, I mean, the massive amount of time, right? We'll just talk about the time commitment there. That's at first, some days it's like, man, is this a sunk cost? Are we going to make it in there? But we started getting these early victories.
Okay.
Okay, we got in front of McChrystal. Okay, great. Then we got an endorsement from Secretary Bob Gates. Like, okay, I think we have something here. And then we talked the next hurdle. Then that agent took us on. We're like, man, oh man, wow, we have an agent. Like the biggest one is once we got that big publisher, like, okay, opportunity cost, it's all positive convexity from here. Like
Gotcha.
people are believing in this. They're seeing what we're doing. Obviously, we found something. We found a gap. There's some sort of dispersion in knowledge or something. We're finding that gap. So I think all cost irrelevant at this point when we look at the future and just helping people. But Alex, please.
No, I think you nailed it. There was a creative and cathartic aspect of the writing experience, which we were conscious of, and we tried to make that available to the reader so that the reader would get engaged and would help them in their lives. That was a huge, exciting, energizing piece of it. The cost was the sacrifice of all available free time over the last 5 years. And so in my dedication to the woman I love, I say, I hope we can go back to doing all the fun things we used to do now that the book is being published, because this has been the most powerful, I think, personal, professional kind of commitment and endeavor that I and we have done. And it has sucked all available time and energy in a way that I think we're very happy with what we've done. But there's a sacrifice involved in this kind of commitment.
Closing this out, last question and a half, if you will. When I pick up this book, or somebody else that I'm recommending to picks up this book, is there any approach they should have to it mentally or even spiritually? Or should they just accept it for what it is and go through the book chapter by chapter and understand the process?
From the military side, everything from chapter 1 is exactly structured how we had everything in the military. It's preparatory. It is the preparatory command of getting 12 to 24 months out. It is the running checklist. After that is stepping into that world of emotions. So I would say for anybody picking this up, realize it is a multifaceted approach. You may already have a great job. You could be 10 years down in the career you've always dreamed of. That's fine. There could be some still mental baggage that needs to be dealt with. So it's multifaceted approach. So I think going through the full process of the book is very helpful. But it's again, I have a friend right now who's 2 years from getting out, and he's dividing it into sections and he's reading it as he goes and figuring out like, okay, I need to go to the VA. Then he'll skip ahead. Okay, I might have TBI, PTSD. Let me reincorporate that into my paperwork with the VA. So you can obviously jump around, but that is from the military side.
Sure, sure.
Yeah. Alex?
It's a great question. I'm going to mirror what Rob said with a slightly different angle.
Sure.
This process of transition can go quickly or can last quite a while, and that's not a negative. There's a lot at stake. There's a lot of ways to do it. So in some ways, this is a book that's a lifelong reference. You go and you pick the pieces that are helpful to you now on a very practical basis, and you put aside the stuff that's not relevant or interesting to you now. On another angle, and this is where I kind of go off into a rabbit hole, this is a book about service to country, teammate, each other. This is a book that has understood that service as one involving necessarily sacrifice and in many cases deep loss. The path, the journey of the veteran and the spouse in that light is one of tremendous service, healing, finding your way back, finding a new purpose, and what we believe is finding a way to redeem your life in a way that is meaningful to you on your terms. And for some folks, what I'm saying, it doesn't jibe with their beliefs, and that's totally fine. You don't need to believe what I'm saying for this book to be helpful. I'm telling you how I believe there is a profound undercurrent of this journey that we try and capture. And this is a journey of tremendous meaning and nobility just because you put on a uniform.
How can people connect with the book, you all, and you talked about speaking engagements? How is all that handled, please?
We have a website. Sorry, Rob, you hit.
Your publisher wouldn't like it if I didn't ask that question. So
No, all good. The book's out there. It's on Amazon. Warrior to Civilian, Field Manual for the Hero's Journey. Barnes & Noble, Hachette is a publisher. You can find their website. If you would like to reach us about some of the work we do with companies to help transition programs, do coaching for veterans, whatnot, go to heroes-journey.net, and they can reach us through the website.
all right, I'll have all those links in the Oscar Mike Radio show post. You know, gentlemen, there's been several books written about the transition process out of the military. The one that I read that comes to mind, I still remember, is Navy Blue to Corporate Gray. It was more of just a how-to and do this, do that, and never really delved into some of the intangible things about what I was going through. So I always felt that was lacking in that regard. Great book, you know, it guides you through some of the, you know, practical aspects of transition, but not really this stuff. So I really enjoyed talking with you. And Alex, I really think I've been telling people and civilians, I get asked all the time, well, I'm a civilian, I don't have a place at the table, no veteran will listen to me. And I think if nothing else, your perspective in this project and what you share with me really disabuses anybody of the notion they don't have value. So thank you for your time. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. We're going to close this down. As we say in Oscar Mike Radio, Mission Flight. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The biggest fear Gold Star families have that their child will be forgotten.
We need to never forget freedom wasn't free.
It's the fact that they give us the life we have now.
we should remember them and give thanks to them.
If I can be a part of something today that's going to make the surviving family of any of these veterans, these heroes, feel better tomorrow, then it's worth it.
That one wreath symbolizes one family that was able to smile because of the generous donations.
To sponsor a wreath and honor a veteran, visit wreathsacrossamerica.org.
Thank you for listening and watching Oscar Mike Radio, where our active duty service members and veterans are in action and the mission is in flight. Oscar Mike Radio is an oversized load co-Sinister One production. If you are a veteran or know a veteran who needs help, please dial 988 and press 1 for the Veterans Crisis Line.